The operating room goes quiet in a way it shouldn't. Monitors still blink. A patient still breathes, barely. But every surgeon has stepped back from the table. Blood pools where it shouldn't. Hands hover, unsure. Someone whispers that there's nothing more to try. In the corner, a nurse who hasn't spoken all night watches the patient's chest rise and fall. She notices something no one else does. Not a symptom, a pattern. She doesn't raise her voice, she doesn't announce herself, she just reaches for a tool that wasn't on the tray a moment ago. Later, they will argue about who made the call, but in this room, right now, one thing becomes clear. They misunderstood who she was. The night shift always began the same way. Lights dimmed, voices lowered, movement slowed to a careful economy. The hospital did not sleep, but it learned how to whisper. She clocked in at 11:02 p.m., 1 minute late by the machine's record, exactly on time by herself. Her badge read Nurse L. Hart. No middle initial, no extra credentials listed beneath her name. Just the standard blue scrubs, clean shoes, hair tied back without ornament. She did not rush. At the nurse's station, 2 residents were finishing coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. One complained quietly about a 12-hour surgery that had turned into 16. The other stared at a tablet, scrolling lab results with tired indifference. Neither looked up when she passed. She checked the board. Trauma or reserved, ICU holding full, 1 surgical case already flagged as high risk, assigned to a senior team. The kind of case everyone hoped would resolve before midnight, before mistakes became more likely. She set her bag in the locker, changed shoes, and washed her hands longer than required. The habit was precise, not obsessive. Every movement had a purpose. When she dried her hands, she folded the paper towel once before discarding it, as if alignment mattered. In operating room 3, a junior nurse struggled with a faulty suction line. The tubing hissed, then went silent. "It's fine," the junior said, flustered, already reaching for a replacement. Nurse Hart stepped in without comment. She traced the line with her fingers, found the kink near the base, rotated it slightly. The suction returned steady and low. The junior blinked. "Thanks." Hart nodded once and moved on. No correction, no instruction. The problem was solved. That was enough. Around her, the room filled slowly. A surgical tech adjusted trays. An anesthesiologist reviewed notes, tapping a pen against his wrist. The lead surgeon had not arrived yet. He rarely did until the last possible minute. Hart checked the instrument table. Everything was there. Almost everything. She reached into a cabinet and added 1 item to the tray. A narrow, unremarkable tool that blended easily with the rest. Anyone glancing would assume it had always been there. She did not announce the change. She did not need permission. At 11:41, the patient was wheeled in from ICU. Male, early 40s, unconscious. Multiple injuries already treated but not resolved. His face was still, too still, the kind of stillness that came from training rather than sedation. Hart noticed the way his hands were positioned, even strapped to the gurney. Relaxed, but ready. Muscles not fully slack. Breathing is controlled even now. She said nothing. Vitals were called out. Numbers landed within acceptable ranges, but only just. The anesthesiologist frowned, adjusted dosage. The surgical tech made a note. Hart adjusted the bed height by 1/2 inch. No one noticed, but the patient's airway alignment improved. She watched the monitor respond. A small change, a necessary one. The surgeon entered at last, confident, already speaking as he pulled on gloves. He did not introduce himself to the room. He did not need to. "Let's get started," he said. "We don't want to drag this out." Hart met his eyes briefly, then looked away. Not submissive. Simply finished with the exchange. As the prep continued, a resident hesitated over a chart detail. "There's something odd about the injury pattern," he said, uncertain. "It doesn't fully match." The surgeon waved him off. "We'll see it once we're inside." Hart felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not fear, calculation. She watched the patient's chest rise and fall. Count the seconds between breaths. I watched the way his body responded to touch, to pressure, to sound. There was a rhythm there that did not belong in a civilian operating room. Still, she remained quiet. When the lights shifted fully on and the room sealed itself into sterile focus, she took her position, hands steady, eyes alert, breathing slowly. To everyone else, she was exactly what she appeared to be, a capable night shift nurse, competent, forgettable, interchangeable. They did not see the way she tracked every person in the room. They did not notice how she anticipated requests before they were spoken. They did not understand why she had chosen to work nights. For now, that was fine. The patient was still alive. The crisis had not yet announced itself, and she was exactly where she needed to be. The first incision had not yet been made, but the room already felt tighter. Monitors hummed softly, their rhythms steady enough to suggest control. Hart stood at her station, hands folded loosely at waist level, eyes moving between the patient and the displays. The surgeons spoke in low voices, reviewing imaging that had already been reviewed twice. "Blunt force trauma," one resident said. "Possible internal bleeding near the diaphragm. No obvious organ rupture on the scan." "Possible," the senior surgeon replied. "Which means we'll confirm." Hart watched the patient's chest. The breathing pattern had shifted, not dramatically, just enough to matter. The anesthesiologist adjusted again, chasing numbers that refused to settle cleanly. "Pressure's a little unstable," he said. "Nothing alarming yet. Nothing alarming yet." The phrase landed heavily in Hart's mind. She had heard it before, in places where yet was the most dangerous word in the room. The imaging flickered onto the main screen. Cross-sections, shaded areas, faint distortions that required interpretation more than certainty. The surgeons leaned in, debating angles and shadows. Hart did not look at the screen for long. She had already taken what she needed from it. Instead, she focused on the patient's neck, the slight tension that remained despite sedation. The jaw was set, the throat muscles engaged in a way that suggested conditioning. She checked the pulse manually, slow, controlled, not struggling. A nurse beside her whispered, "This one's a mess." The ICU didn't want to keep him. Hart nodded once, non-committal. The surgeon outlined the plan. Standard approach, conservative, minimize risk. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had earned his authority through repetition and success. No one challenged him. As preparations continued, Hart made another small adjustment, rotating the patient's shoulder by a few degrees, relieving pressure along the upper torso. The monitor responded almost immediately. Oxygen saturation ticked up by 1 point. The anesthesiologist glanced at the screen, surprised. He did not ask why. "Probably just settling," he said. Hart returned her hands to neutral position. The resident hesitated again. "There's something else," he said quietly. "The injury timing doesn't add up. Some of this looks older, healed, but overlapping." The senior surgeon exhaled through his nose. "You're overthinking it." Hart did not intervene. She had learned long ago that timing mattered more than correctness. Speak too early, and truth was dismissed. Speak too late, and it no longer mattered. She catalogued the details instead. Old injuries layered beneath new ones, muscle memory persisting under sedation, a body that responded to stress with discipline rather than panic. This was not a patient who had been surprised by violence. The first incision was made, clean, controlled. Blood appeared, darker than expected. The suction pulled it away, but the flow did not match the anticipated pattern. "Pressure?" the surgeon asked. "Stable," the anesthesiologist replied, though his tone had tightened. Hart leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing. The bleeding was not chaotic. It was directional, as if the body were compensating, rerouting, adapting. She adjusted the suction angle by a fraction. The flow steadied. No one commented. Minutes passed. The room settled into focused silence, broken only by clipped instructions and instrument exchanges. Then, without warning, the monitor dipped. Not a crash, a warning. "Hold on," the anesthesiologist said. "That's not right." The surgeon paused, hand still inside the patient. "What do you have?" "Pressure's dropping faster than it should." Hart checked the patient's face. The jaw tightened further. A reflex, fighting sedation. The body was reacting to something it recognized. She stepped closer, her voice calm, barely above the ambient noise. "He's compensating." The surgeon glanced at her, irritation flickering. "For what?" Hart did not answer immediately. She adjusted the patient's position again, subtly changing alignment. The pressure stabilized, just slightly. The anesthesiologist looked at the screen, then at her. "What did you do?" "Nothing," Hart said. It was true enough. The surgeon returned his focus to the procedure, but the room had changed. The easy confidence was gone. In its place was alertness edged with unease. This case was no longer routine. As the surgery continued, small problems kept surfacing. Minor drops, unexpected resistance, delays that did not match the textbook. Each time, Hart intervened quietly, buying seconds, then minutes. No one thanked her. No one questioned her presence. But more than one person began to watch her hands. By the time the surgeon stepped back to reassess, sweat visible at his temple, the unspoken truth had settled over the room. This was the case no one wanted. And the night was just beginning. The surgeon straightened his back and stepped away from the table, flexing his fingers as if to shake loose a thought he did not want to examine too closely. The monitors had stabilized, but not convincingly. Numbers held their places through effort, not ease. "All right," he said. "Let's continue." The resident nodded quickly, relieved to have direction again. The surgical tech adjusted the light. The room resumed its rhythm, but the cadence was off by half a beat. Hart remained where she was. Her eyes never left the patient. She noticed it first in the shoulders. A slight tightening, symmetrical, as though the body were bracing. Sedation should have erased that response. It had not. She checked the 4 lines. Secure. Dosage correct. No obvious cause. She leaned in, her voice measured and low. "There's resistance building in the upper abdomen." The surgeon did not look at her. "That's expected. Not like this," Hart replied. He paused, just long enough to acknowledge that she had spoken. Then he resumed, "We're already in. We'll manage it." It was not a dismissal born of arrogance. It was a habit. Years of experience told him that interruptions from nurses rarely changed outcomes. Most of the time he was right. Hart stepped back without protest. Her face did not change. Inside she recalculated. The bleeding increased again, slow but persistent. Not enough to panic the room, but enough to demand attention. The suction line worked harder now. The anesthesiologist frowned. Pressure's drifting. "Adjust," the surgeon said. "We're fine." Hart watched the patient's breathing, counted, adjusted airflow by a small increment, careful not to draw notice. The monitor responded, smoothing slightly. The resident glanced at her hands, then away. As the procedure continued, the surgeon grew more assertive, compensating for uncertainty with speed. Instruments were exchanged faster, commands sharpened. Hart stayed quiet. She knew the cost of pushing too hard, too soon. Authority, once challenged, rarely softened. It hardened. She focused instead on prevention, a slight tilt of the table, a change in suction timing. Micro-adjustments that kept the patient just within survivable margins. At one point, the resident whispered, "Should we slow down?" The surgeon snapped a look at him. No. Hart met the resident's eyes briefly. A subtle shake of her head. Not now. Minutes later, the surgeon encountered unexpected resistance. His hand stilled. "That's not where it should be," he muttered. Hart leaned closer, her voice calm. "The tissue's under tension. If you continue at that angle—" He cut her off. "I know what I'm doing." The words were sharp, but not cruel. The room went quiet again, the kind of quiet that pressed in on the ears. Hart stepped back, hands returning to neutral. She had given the warning. The responsibility had shifted. The surgeon adjusted slightly on his own, instinct guiding him away from the worst outcome. The resistance eased, but not fully. Sweat beaded along his hairline. "Why isn't this matching the scan?" he asked no one in particular. Hart did not answer, she already knew. The patient's vitals dipped again, this time more noticeably. The anesthesiologist spoke up. "We're losing ground." The surgeon cursed under his breath. "All right." Pause. He stepped back, pulling off his gloves. For the first time since entering the room, he looked at Hart directly. "You've been making adjustments," he said. "Not an accusation, an observation." "Yes," Hart replied. "Why?" She chose her words carefully. "Because he responds to positioning, not just intervention." The surgeon frowned. "That doesn't make sense." Hart met his gaze steadily. "It does if the body expects injury." Silence stretched. The surgeon looked back at the patient, then at the monitors. He did not like what he saw, but he did not yet trust her explanation. "Proceed," he said finally. "But stay in your lane." Hart nodded once. No argument, no reaction. Inside, she felt the familiar weight settle in. The cost of being right but unheard. The cost of watching a preventable failure approach in slow motion. She repositioned herself, closer now, ready. The room moved forward again, but the balance had shifted. The surgeon's confidence was no longer effortless. The nurse's silence carried more weight than before. They were still underestimating her, but they were beginning to feel it. The moment came quietly. No alarms screamed. No instruments clattered. The surgeon had just resumed his work, hands steady when the monitor dipped again, sharper this time. A clean, unmistakable drop. "Pressure's falling," the anesthesiologist said. His voice was controlled, but the room heard the difference. The surgeon froze. How fast? Faster than before. Hart leaned in, eyes already on the patient's abdomen. The bleeding had changed. It was no longer compensating. The body had reached its limit. "Clamp," the surgeon said. "Now." The surgical tech passed the instrument. The clamp went on. For a brief second it looked like it might hold. Then it didn't. Blood welled up, dark and insistent. The suction struggled to keep pace. "Damn it," the surgeon muttered. "That should have worked." Hart watched the patient's chest. The breathing pattern faltered, then corrected itself, as if the body were making a choice. She felt a chill settle along her spine. This was not a random failure. This was an adaptation breaking down. The anesthesiologist adjusted medication again. "I'm losing control of him." The surgeon's jaw tightened. "We're not there yet." Hart stepped closer, her voice calm but firmer than before. "That approach won't stabilize him." The surgeon shot her a look. "What approach?" "The one we're using." Silence fell, heavy and immediate. The resident stopped moving. The surgical tech's hands hovered. The surgeon exhaled slowly. "You're saying we're wrong." "I'm saying it won't hold," Hart replied. He turned back to the table, frustration evident. "Then what do you suggest?" Hart hesitated for half a second, timing again. She could feel the edge now, the point where restraint gave way to necessity. "Change the sequence," she said. "Relieve pressure before you reinforce." "That's backwards," the surgeon said. "It's how his body's reacting." The anesthesiologist glanced between them. "If we don't do something, we're going to crash." The surgeon stared at the open field, weighing pride against outcome. "Give me 30 seconds, he said. "If this doesn't work, we reassess." He tried again, adjusting technique, reinforcing the clamp. For a moment the bleeding slowed. Then the monitor plunged. Alarms finally sounded, sharp and unforgiving. "Pressure's crashing," the anesthesiologist said. "We're losing him." The surgeon stepped back, hands shaking now despite himself. "Call it," he said quietly. "Not defeat, calculation, the kind that comes from knowing when the math no longer works." The resident swallowed. Time of wait. The word cut through the noise, low but absolute. Everyone turned to Hart. She stood at the side of the table, one hand already on the bed controls, the other hovering over the instrument tray. Her face was calm, but there was no softness in it now. "Give me 10 seconds, she said, not a request, a statement. The surgeon hesitated. Authority wavered, then cracked. 10, he said. Hart moved. She adjusted the bed angle sharply, far more than she had before. The patient's torso shifted, redistributing pressure. She swapped out the clamp for the narrow tool she had placed earlier. Her movements precise, practiced. "Hold suction steady," she said. The tech obeyed without thinking. Hart applied the tool, not to stop the bleeding, but to redirect it, temporarily, deliberately. The effect was immediate. The flow slowed, not because the injury was fixed, but because the body had been given a new path. The monitor steadied, not safe, but alive. The alarm softened, then fell silent. The anesthesiologist stared at the screen. "What did you just do?" Hart did not look at him. Bought time. The surgeon looked at the field, then at her hands. His voice was quieter now. "That wasn't standard." "No," Hart said, "but it worked. For now." The room exhaled as one. No one spoke. No one moved. The first fix had failed. Everyone could see that now. And the only reason the patient was still breathing was standing right beside them. The surgeon met Hart's eyes again. Something new there. Uncertainty, yes, but also recognition. Not of her identity, of her authority. The room did not return to normal. It hovered instead in a fragile pause, as if everyone understood that whatever had just happened was not a solution, only a delay. The patient's vitals held, but they did so under tension, like a rope pulled too tight. The surgeon broke the silence first. "All right," he said quietly. "We reassess." No one argued, no one needed to. Hart stepped back half a pace, giving space without retreating. Her eyes stayed on the patient, tracking every small response. The chest rose unevenly now. The body was tiring. The surgeon leaned over the field again, slower this time. "That maneuver you used," he said without looking at her. "It's not something they teach." Hart wiped her hands, methodical. "It's not meant to be taught here." That earned a glance, brief, searching. The resident shifted uncomfortably. "What are we missing?" he asked. Hart studied the exposed tissue. The wound told a story if you knew how to read it. The angle of trauma, the way muscle fibers had tightened instead of torn, the absence of panic responses. He anticipated injury, she said. The surgeon frowned. "You can't know that." "I can," Hart replied. She did not elaborate. She adjusted the suction again, then repositioned the patient's arm, exposing a faint scar near the shoulder. Old, surgical, too precise to be accidental. The surgeon noticed it too. "That's not from this incident." "No," Hart said, "it's from training." The word landed heavily. The anesthesiologist glanced at the chart. "There's nothing in his history." "There wouldn't be," Hart replied. She moved closer, lowering her voice. "His body is responding to pressure the way trained operators do. He's bracing instead of collapsing, redirecting blood flow, conserving oxygen." The surgeon straightened slowly. "You're saying he's fighting us. I'm saying he doesn't know how to stop." Silence again. This time it felt different. Less resistance, more listening. Hart pointed to the wound. Standard repair won't hold because his musculature is actively countering it. You're reinforcing against movement instead of accounting for it. The surgeon considered this, jaw tight. So what do we do? Hart paused. This was the line. Step over it, and there was no going back. But the patient's vitals flickered, a reminder that hesitation had a cost. We change the approach, she said. We stabilize him the way he's trained to stabilize himself. The surgeon exhaled slowly. Explain. Minimal force, Hart said. No aggressive reinforcement. Let the body settle, then repair. That goes against everything. I know, the anesthesiologist interrupted. Pressure's dropping again. The surgeon looked at the monitors, then back at Hart. The calculation was visible now. Pride weighed against outcome, protocol against reality. All right, he said finally. Show me. Hart did not smile, she did not nod, she simply moved. She adjusted the table again, this time more gently. She changed the order of instruments, removing two that encouraged tension. She guided the surgeon's hands with brief, precise instructions, angles, timing, pauses. Wait, she said once, when instinct urged speed. Now. The bleeding slowed, not stopped, controlled. The patient's breathing eased, just slightly, enough. The surgeon followed her lead without comment. The resident watched, eyes wide, absorbing a lesson he did not yet understand. Minutes passed. The room worked in near silence, each movement deliberate. The crisis did not vanish, but it receded, held at bay by restraint rather than force. Finally, the surgeon stepped back, wiping his brow. This shouldn't work, he said quietly. But it is, the anesthesiologist replied. The surgeon looked at Hart again, longer this time. Where did you learn this? Hart met his gaze. Somewhere failure wasn't an option. He nodded slowly. He did not ask more. The pattern beneath the wound was clearer now, not just physical, but behavioral. The patient was not an anomaly. He was a trained operator who had survived long enough to reach this table, and Hart was the only one in the room who knew exactly what that meant. The monitors held steady, for now, but the night was far from over. Stability never announced itself. It only lingered briefly before slipping away. Hart saw it before the monitors reacted. A tightening in the patient's neck, a subtle change in skin tone. The body was preparing again, this time not to compensate, but to endure. Pressure's wavering, the anesthesiologist said, eyes fixed on the screen. He's burning through reserves. The surgeon's hands slowed. How long do we have? Minutes, came the answer, if that. Hart stepped closer, her focus narrowing. The adjustments they had made were holding, but the cost was rising. The patient's system was running on discipline alone now, drawing from something finite. He's reaching the end of what he can sustain, she said. The surgeon nodded grimly. Then we finish. Now. He moved decisively, pushing past the careful restraint they had adopted. The bleeding responded immediately, worsening, reclaiming space. Hart placed a hand lightly on his wrist, not forceful, not dramatic, just enough to stop the motion. Don't, she said. The room froze. The surgeon looked at her hand, then at her face. No one had ever stopped him like that in his own operating room. Remove your hand, he said quietly. Hart did not. If you push, he will crash. Not slowly, all at once. The anesthesiologist swallowed. She's right. The numbers are spiking before they fall. That's not normal. The surgeon's jaw tightened. Authorities strained against evidence. We can't wait him out. No, Hart agreed. But we can stop forcing him to fight. She withdrew her hand, giving him the space to choose. Look at his breathing, she continued. It's controlled because he was trained to stay functional under pain and blood loss. But he can't switch that off. Every intervention you make, his body answers like it's still in danger. The resident spoke up, tentative. "So we're triggering him." Hart nodded. "Yes." The surgeon stared the field, then at the patient's face. "Then what do we do?" Hart inhaled slowly. This was the moment she had been avoiding, the one where explanation became exposure. "We change environments," she said, "as much as we can in this room." "That's impossible," the surgeon replied. "It's not," Hart said, "but it means letting go of speed." The anesthesiologist shook his head. "If we slow down, we lose him. If we don't," Hart said, "we definitely do." Silence pressed in again, the kind that followed irreversible decisions. "All right," the surgeon said finally. "You're directing." The words were quiet, almost casual, but everyone heard the weight in them. Hart nodded once. No acknowledgement beyond that. She began issuing instructions, not commands but precise requests. Lower the lights slightly, reduce unnecessary noise, adjust ventilation rhythm to match the patient's breathing rather than override it. "Talk to him," she said to the anesthesiologist. "Tell him where he is, even if he can't hear." The anesthesiologist hesitated, then complied. His voice softened, grounding. Hart guided the surgeon's hands again, slower this time. She signaled pauses where instinct urged action. Each restraint felt wrong to the room, and right to the patient. The monitors responded gradually, not with improvement but with compliance. "He's settling," the resident whispered. Hart watched the patient's jaw unclench by a fraction. The shoulders eased, the body stopped bracing, but the cost was visible. Sweat beaded at Hart's temple now. Her breathing remained controlled, but her hands trembled slightly as she reset an instrument. Not fear, strain. The surgeon noticed. "You okay?" "Yes," she said. It was not entirely true. Minutes passed. The crisis shifted shape, becoming less explosive and more exhausting. The room worked under a sustained, fragile balance. Then, without warning, the patient's pressure dipped again, harder than before. "Here it comes," the anesthesiologist said. Hart's eyes sharpened. "No," she said, "not yet." She reached for the narrow tool again, applying it with exact timing. The effect was immediate but costly. Her shoulders stiffened as she leaned into the motion, absorbing strain that should not have been hers to take. The monitor steadied, barely. The surgeon stared at her. "That maneuver, if you mistime it." "I know," Hart said. The room held its breath. The escalation had not ended. It had simply changed form, and Hart was paying for every second she bought with something the room could not see. The room had learned how to listen to her. That, Hart realized, was the most dangerous change of all. The monitors held, but only just. The patient's numbers flickered at the edge of tolerance, stabilized by restraint rather than repair. Every second they waited increased the risk of sudden collapse. Every move they made risked triggering it. The surgeon wiped his hands slowly. "We can't keep him like this," he said. "We need a definitive fix." Hart nodded. "I know." The anesthesiologist glanced at her. "Then tell us what we're missing." Hart hesitated, not because she lacked an answer, but because she understood the cost of giving it. She looked at the patient's face again. The tension had returned, subtle but present. The body was preparing for another surge. "He's conditioned to stay operational," she said finally. "Pain, blood loss, chaos. It doesn't signal him to shut down. It tells him to push." The resident frowned. "That's not normal." "No," Hart said. "It's learned." The surgeon folded his arms. "You keep saying that. Where did I learn?" Hart met his eyes. This time she did not look away. "In places where survival depends on staying functional after injury," she said, "where medical care comes late, if at all." The room was silent now. Even the machines seemed quieter. The surgeon's voice dropped. "Are you saying he's military?" "I'm saying he's trained," Hart replied. "The rest doesn't matter. It did to them. She could see it in their faces. A patient stopped being just a patient when he became something else, an operator, a variable, a complication with implications beyond medicine. The anesthesiologist spoke carefully. If that's true, then what we're doing is fighting his training, Hart said. Every aggressive intervention tells his body it's still in danger. The surgeon paced once, then stopped. Then what's the alternative? Hart exhaled slowly. We need to let his system disengage. That means reducing stimuli even further. No rushing, no force. That could take hours, the anesthesiologist said. Yes, we don't have hours. Hart nodded. Then we create them. The surgeon stared at her. How? She reached up and loosened her gloves, then pulled them off. The gesture was small but deliberate. Everyone noticed. I stay with him, she said. Direct contact, continuous regulation. We don't push the repair until his body stands down. The resident's eyes widened. That's not protocol. No, Hart said. It isn't. The surgeon shook his head slowly. If this goes wrong, I know who it falls on, Hart said. The room understood then. This was not a suggestion. It was an offer of responsibility. You'll be exposed, the anesthesiologist said quietly. Administration will ask why a nurse was directing a surgical delay. I'm aware. The surgeon studied her face. Not for confidence, for truth. Why are you willing to take that risk? Hart did not answer immediately. Her gaze returned to the patient. Because if we don't, she said, he dies. The surgeon closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, a decision had been made. All right, he said, we follow your lead. Hart nodded once. No relief crossed her face. She moved closer to the patient, placing one gloved hand lightly on his forearm. The touch was steady, grounding. She spoke quietly, not to the room, but to him. You're safe, she said. You don't have to hold anymore. The anesthesiologist adjusted sedation in careful increments, guided by her signals. The lights dimmed further. Movement slowed to a near stop. Minutes stretched. The patient's breathing faltered, then smoothed. The jaw loosened. Muscles released tension they had been holding since arrival. The monitors reflected the change, numbers settling into something resembling stability. But Hart swayed slightly as she straightened. The strain of maintaining focus, of carrying responsibility, was catching up with her. The surgeon noticed. You need to step back. Not yet, Hart said. A bead of sweat traced down her temple. Her hand remained steady on the patient. She had spoken once, take control once, and now she was paying for it, not with recognition, but with exposure. The room followed her in silence, knowing that if this failed, there would be no hiding where the blame belonged. The change did not come all at once. It arrived in increments so small they could have been missed by anyone not watching for them. Hart felt it through her hand before the monitors confirmed it. The moment the patient's body stopped resisting, his forearm softened beneath her palm. The tension that had lived there, constant and unconscious, finally released. His breathing deepened, no longer measured, no longer controlled, just human. Sedation level, Hart asked quietly. Stable, the anesthesiologist replied. He's responding differently. The surgeon leaned in, studying the field. The bleeding had slowed again, but this time without intervention. Tissue that had fought every touch now lay still. This is the first time it's matched the scan, he said. Hart nodded. Because this is the first time his body isn't preparing for the next hit. The resident stared at the patient, then at Hart. How did you know he'd respond like that? Hart did not answer. She adjusted her stance instead, easing pressure off her own legs. The tremor in her hands had faded, replaced by a heavy fatigue that settled deep in her shoulders. The surgeon resumed work, carefully, almost reverently. Each movement was slower now, deliberate, respectful of the fragile state they had reached. Minutes passed. Then more. The repair began to hold. The anesthesiologist spoke first, disbelief edging his voice. Pressures stabilizing, not bouncing, actually stabilizing. The monitors reflected it, numbers aligning in a way they hadn't all night. Not perfect, but real. The surgeon exhaled long and controlled. "All right," he said. "We can finish this." As he worked, his eyes kept flicking to Hart's hands, still resting lightly on the patient. Not performing a task, maintaining a presence. "This approach," he said quietly. "It's not civilian." Hart met his gaze. For a moment the room felt smaller, the air heavier. "No," she said. The surgeon's voice dropped further. "It's combat medicine." Hart did not correct him. The resident swallowed. "That's classified, isn't it?" Hart removed her hand from the patient slowly, as if breaking contact too quickly might undo what they had achieved. "Some of it," she said. The surgeon straightened, stepping back from the table. His eyes searched her face, not for credentials, but for confirmation of something he already suspected. "You're not just a nurse," he said. Hart met his gaze steadily. "I am a nurse, but you've..." She interrupted him gently. "I do the job I'm assigned. The room absorbed that." The anesthesiologist nodded slowly, understanding the boundary she was drawing, and why. The surgery concluded without drama, no sudden drops, no alarms, just careful closure and steady vitals. When the final suture was placed, the surgeon stepped back and removed his gloves. "He'll live," he said, not triumph, relief. The resident let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Hart stepped away from the table, leaning briefly against the counter as the adrenaline drained out of her. The room did not miss it this time. "You should sit," the surgeon said. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice was quieter now. He studied her, then nodded. "You saved him." Hart shook her head. "We did." The surgeon did not argue, but something had shifted permanently. He glanced at the patient, then back at her. "Someone's going to ask questions." "Yes," Hart said. "And when will they do?" "I'll answer what's necessary." The surgeon considered that, then extended a hand, not for a handshake, but in acknowledgement. Authority recognizing authority, without words. Hart accepted it briefly, then stepped back. The silent operator had been revealed, not by a confession, not by a badge, but by method, by restraint, by knowing when not to act. The patient was alive, and Hart was already preparing for the cost that would come next. The patient's vitals held for nearly 3 minutes, long enough for relief to start forming, long enough for someone to believe the worst was over. Hart did not. She stood a step back from the table now, arms loose at her sides, watching the monitors with narrowed focus. The pattern was wrong, too smooth, too even. She had seen it before, false stability, the kind that came before collapse. "Pressure's steady," the anesthesiologist said cautiously. Hart shook her head. "It's artificial." The surgeon looked up sharply. "What do you see?" "Delayed response," Hart said. "He's compensating again, but not consciously this time. His system's trying to protect something deeper." As if summoned by the words, the monitor dipped, harder than any drop before. Alarms cut through the room. "Pressure's falling fast," the anesthesiologist said. "This is different." The surgeon swore under his breath and moved back in. Where? Hart was already pointing. There, secondary collapse. It was masked by the earlier tension. The resident's voice shook. "We missed that on the scan." "No," Hart said. "It wasn't there yet." The bleeding surged again, sudden and violent. The suction whined, overwhelmed. "This is it," the anesthesiologist said. "We're out of margin." The surgeon's hands moved fast now, but the earlier restraint was gone. Instinct took over, clamp, pressure, reinforce. The patient's body reacted immediately, heart rate spiking, muscles tensing despite sedation. Hart stepped in, her voice cutting through the noise. Stop. You're triggering him. We don't have a choice, the surgeon snapped. Yes, we do, Hart said, but it's not clean. The surgeon hesitated. Talk. Hart inhaled slowly. We bypass the standard repair. Temporary internal diversion. It'll look wrong. It'll feel wrong. And if we mistime it... She didn't finish the sentence. The anesthesiologist stared at the numbers. If we don't do something, he dies in the next minute. The surgeon looked at Hart, not as a subordinate, as a peer in crisis. Do it, he said. Hart moved. She took the narrow tool again, but this time paired it with an improvised setup. Repositioning, compression, redirection. Her movements were fast now, but not frantic. Each step followed a sequence etched into muscle memory. Hold suction, she said. Exactly here. The tech obeyed instantly. Wait, Hart said again. Now. She applied pressure at a precise moment between heartbeats, using the body's own rhythm against the bleed. The effect was immediate and brutal. The bleeding slowed, then choked down to a controlled seep. But Hart's breath caught. Her hand slipped slightly before she corrected it. Pain flared up her arm, sharp and blinding, as she absorbed force meant for the patient's body. The surgeon saw it. You're hurt. I'm functional, Hart said. The anesthesiologist adjusted sedation, voice tight. Pressure's climbing. Slowly. But it's climbing. Seconds stretched. Every muscle in Hart's body screamed restraint. Sweat blurred her vision. Hold, she whispered. Not to the room, to herself. The patient's vitals steadied again, this time uneven but real. The surgeon moved in carefully, following her setup exactly, finishing the repair around the temporary diversion. No deviation. No improvisation. When it was done, Hart released pressure and staggered back half a step, catching herself on the counter. The monitors held. No alarms, no sudden drops. Just fragile life, clinging. The surgeon exhaled, long and shaken. It worked. Hart nodded faintly. She lowered herself onto a stool before her legs gave out completely. The anesthesiologist looked at her arm. You're bleeding. Hart glanced down. Blood had soaked through the cuff of her scrub sleeve. She hadn't felt it until now. I'll deal with it later, she said. The room was silent again, but different now. Not tense, reverent. They had faced failure directly and stepped through it at cost. The patient was alive, and Hart had paid for that truth in blood. The OR was quiet now, but the silence carried weight. Hart stood by the table, wiping her hands with a sterile cloth, her arms trembling slightly, not from exhaustion, but from the lingering adrenaline. The patient's vitals were finally stable enough that they could leave the room without immediate danger. The surgeons were finishing documentation, their voices low and careful. There were questions they wanted answered, explanations they needed. But Hart knew the rules of this room. Answers could be factual, concise, devoid of flourish. She offered nothing more. The senior surgeon approached her, voice quiet, measured. You did what needed to be done. There's no other way to put it. Hart met his gaze briefly. The patient is alive. That's enough. He nodded, almost reluctantly. The administration will want a report. They'll ask why a nurse directed actions beyond her role. Hart's expression did not change. I'll answer factually, that's all. The resident lingered nearby, hesitant. What you did, it saved him. Hart shook her head slightly. We all did our part. Her restraint was absolute, even as the room subtly acknowledged her authority. No one clapped, no one called attention. There were no accolades, only quiet recognition, whispered in fleeting glances and half-formed sentences that died in the OR's recycled air. The anesthesiologist adjusted the patient's sedation. He's stable for transfer back to the ICU. For the first time tonight, I can say that without hesitation. Hart nodded, checking monitors one last time. She catalogued the patient's stability, the residual tension, the subtle signs that would indicate lingering trauma. Every observation mattered, but no one in the room would see the depth of her vigilance. That was by design. She retrieved a small first aid kit from the cabinet and treated her own scraped hand, remnants from the final maneuver in Chapter 9. A superficial wound, but it was proof of risk taken quietly, without spectacle. The surgeons began to leave the OR one by one, their footsteps measured. They did not thank her again. They didn't need to. Their respect had already been conveyed in subtle ways. The precise way they followed her instructions, the pause in conversation when she entered a space, the acknowledgement of her authority without asking for explanation. Hart packed away the tools she had used, including the narrow one she had introduced at the start. No one noticed it, though its presence had been pivotal. No one would ask about it. That was the way she operated. A quiet exchange passed between Hart and the resident, a brief nod, a shared understanding. He had glimpsed something, just enough to know she was more than she appeared, but he would not speak of it, and she would not confirm. As the last team member left, Hart lingered a moment longer at the table, ensuring that everything was documented, monitored, and ready for the patient's continued care. She straightened, adjusted her scrubs, and turned to leave the OR. The corridor outside was dimly lit, sterile, and humming softly. Hart walked alone. Her steps were steady, controlled, deliberate. No one followed, no one watched. Behind her, the operating room returned to its usual rhythm, unremarkable on the schedule, unnoticed by the world outside these walls. The patient was alive. That was all that mattered. Hart paused at the intersection of two corridors, taking a deep breath. She had intervened, directed, and endured what no one else could have. Recognition was irrelevant, spotlight unnecessary. She continued walking, shadowed only by the dim hospital lights, carrying the weight of authority and restraint like a silent burden. Somewhere ahead, another shift awaited, another patient, another crisis. And she would be ready, as always, unseen, unheralded, indispensable. The hospital's corridors were quiet now. The hum of machines was the only sound, punctuated occasionally by distant voices or the squeak of a cart rolling over tile. Night had deepened into early morning, sterile and still, carrying with it the kind of silence that allowed reflection without judgment. Hart moved steadily through the hallways, her steps measured. The exhaustion from the past hours pressed against her, heavy in her shoulders, but her gait remained controlled. She had no one to answer to, no applause to seek, no recognition to demand. Her work had been done, and that was sufficient. She passed the ICU wing, where the patient she had saved lay now under careful monitoring. She did not linger. Her eyes met his bedside monitor briefly, confirming stable vitals. The faint rise and fall of his chest told her everything she needed to know. He would survive. No one called her name. No one stopped her. She did not want them to. A nurse's assistant passed her, nodding politely. Hart returned the gesture, a quiet acknowledgement of shared labor. Beyond that, the hospital continued in its mechanical rhythm, oblivious to the extraordinary struggle that had taken place behind the closed doors of the operating room. She reached the locker room, stripped off her bloodied scrubs, and folded them meticulously. A small cut on her hand was bandaged, the wound a subtle reminder of the night's events. No one would ask. No one needed to. It was enough that she bore it. Before leaving, she paused in the dim light of the hallway. Her reflection appeared faintly in the polished tile of the wall. Eyes steady, face calm, exhaustion hidden beneath a practiced mask of control. A silent acknowledgement of the truth no one had recognized. She was more than she seemed, and her authority had been proven not by title but by action. As she pushed open the exit doors to the quiet parking lot, the early dawn began to color the sky. It was a muted light, soft but persistent, casting long shadows behind her. She stepped into it without hesitation, shoulders squared, her presence unassuming yet undeniably strong. The hospital receded behind her, and she walked into the approaching day, unnoticed, unheralded, carrying the weight of the night's authority with her. The patient had survived, lives had been preserved, lessons had been learned. And yet, as always, the world remained unaware. Hart disappeared into the city streets, just another figure among many. Her work would continue, her vigilance would remain, her identity would stay her own. Somewhere another crisis waited, and she would be there, quiet, competent, unseen, indispensable. The night was over, the spotlight never arrived, and that was exactly how she wanted it.